learning goal of this lesson is to analyse how Nick Enright uses language and dramatic techniques to shape meaning in a property of the clan. In 1991, Brian Joyce, the artistic director of Freewheels, Newcastle's professional theatre and education company, approached Nick Enright to write a play exploring the rape and murder of Lee, a 14-year-old girl. Lee had been raped and murdered during an underage party on Stockton Beach, just outside of Newcastle on the 3rd of November 1989. Both Joyce and Enright wanted to avoid dramatising the events of Lee's rape and murder. Instead, they wanted to create an event that was about a group of kids who were witnesses to a parallel sort of event. In doing this, the two men aimed to provide a safe forum where the young people of the Newcastle region could vent their grief, anger and shame. Joyce explained to Enright that this forum was desperately needed, saying, "You don't understand what's happened in this community as a result of that event. There's a whole group of 16 and 17-year-old kids who cannot speak to each other or to any adult about the issues that it raised for them. They have been so damaged by being participants in this experience, or witnesses, or through having a sister or brother who was in the class or at the party or whatever, and it's become a taboo subject." I believe the key idea that Enright wanted to impart on his teenage audience in a property of the clan is that associating masculinity with control and domination is destructive. Through his play, Enright held up a mirror to Australian society, revealing how men seek to subjugate women. Philip Rouse, who directed a 2013 production of A Property of the Clan, stated in an interview that, "When looking at this material as a straight white male, and especially while reflecting on your teenage years, realising how much you were enthralled of this conservative blueprint can take you by surprise. You want to believe you're a good person, but maybe that wasn't always the case. The process of shedding damaging notions of masculinity, particularly attitudes towards women, is a long one, and one that not every male goes through. And in working on this play, if it forces you to engage with attitudes you have shed, and admit that you understand them from the inside, that is what I mean by being honest as a director." If the play was to have any chance of resonating with its intended teenage audience and imparting the message about masculinity, the dialogue of the teenage characters needed to sound authentic. Personally, I think Enright's successful. The colloquial vernacular and a lack of grammar in the dialogue captures the rhythms of everyday speech. Enright represents the cocky banter of teenage boys through Rico's explanation of why he has returned to Black Rock. "'Cause I thought yous all had to be ready for a boot up the arse." There is a rhythm to Rico's language, and Enright explained this saying, "The related thing is that I think of writing for performance as being a form of music, because it's utterance, rhythmic utterance to some degree, in a way that prose fiction isn't and a lot of poetry is. It's conceived for utterance, and so in a loose kind of way there's a score underlying it, and I hear everything musically." Although the cadence of the teenage language is rhythmically beautiful, Rico and Jared's dialogue also conveys how language can be used to discriminate and oppress. The male characters in A Property of the Clan share a common language that denigrates women's and effeminate males. Girls are subjected to sexist labels. They're sluts, snotty stuck-up bitches, bloody moles, horny bitches, conchas, swats, rich bitches, hell chicks, dogs, bush pigs, spunt buckets, and real little cock-teasing whores. The use of this sexist language identifies the boys as a member of the clan. Glenn, who doesn't use these sexist labels and has a friendship with Rachel, doesn't fit within the established boundaries of masculinity. As such, he's also denigrated and labelled as sus, a sus dog, a poofter, a queer dog, a fag, a wuss, and gay. This misogynistic and homophobic language is used to establish the dominance of heterosexual males, and there is a stark difference in the language the boys use to describe each other, which is positive and inclusive. Jared, for example, describes Rico as a top bloke, a mad bastard and mate. Through this use of language, Enright affects the audience's interpretation of the characters, and consequently, through the characters, the ideas in the play. Enright also uses a number of dramatic techniques to shape meaning in the play. One of the first dramatic techniques I analyse when reading a play is to analyse the dialogue at the moments mid-scene when characters make entrances or exits. In scene 10, Rachel and Glenn are questioning why the rape and murder occurred, and Glenn asks, "Why did no one stick up for her?" At this moment, Jared enters, And Enright's choice to have him entering on Glenn's question foreshadows Jared's later revelation that he witnessed Tracy's rape and did nothing to help her. Why didn't Jared stick up for Tracy? Why didn't he report the rape to the police? A property of the clan suggests that Jared's inaction and silence are symptoms of an insidious masculine culture that permits violence and conspires to protect its members. When Jared confesses to Rico that he needs to talk to someone because he witnessed the rape, Rico tells him to wipe it. They're your mates. Forget about it. Rico doesn't empathise with Jared or Tracy at all. Ironically, Rico's catchphrase is, "How does it feel?" Enright's use of this ironic motif highlights Rico's emotional inadequacies and the masculine culture that identifies a lack of empathy as manly. A property of the clan explores the effects of culturally ingrained misogyny. Tracy's rape and murder is not a one-off event, but rather a manifestation of a much deeper societal problem. In scene 14, Rachel angrily states, "This stuff goes on all the time." This continuity of oppression is reflected in the play through scene repetitions. The action in scenes 1, 4, 9 and 20 is almost identical, involving a student report on prejudice and discrimination. Enright's use of repetition is really effective. Repetition is a composer's loudspeaker. It tells the audience that the repeated idea is vitally important. However, the beauty of Enright's use of repetition is that it symbolises the recurring nature of female oppression in our society. This oppression is so ingrained into our culture that it's almost invisible. For example, the traditional institution of marriage is sexist. The father walks the bride, who is wearing white, symbolising her virginity, down the aisle to give her away. The wife vows to honour and obey her husband. And finally, the wife takes her husband's surname. The institution of marriage is just one example of a tradition which is such a part of our culture that we don't, for the great part, consider its origins. However, if you examine these traditions more closely, it becomes clear that they signify that a woman is the property of a man, initially her father, and then her husband once she marries. A property of the clan seeks to expose this invisible misogynistic culture that is ingrained into our language, and therefore the way we perceive the world. In exposing this misogyny, it challenges us to change it. And that's it. You've made it. To recap the main points of the lesson, I analysed how Nick Enright used language and dramatic techniques to shape meaning in a property of the clan. Enright created an authentic voice for his teenage characters, incorporating a colloquial vernacular and a lack of grammar in their dialogue. However, the dialogue also conveyed how language can be used to discriminate against and oppress groups through the use of labels. I analysed how Enright used entrances and exits, foreshadowing, irony, motif, repetition and symbolism in the play to shape meaning. Enright also used other dramatic techniques, but I'll leave them for you to find out and analyse. So, as the orchestra music begins to play, the final thing for me to do is to thank you so much for watching.